Grief is a sound out here. It howls across the prairie just like the wind, rattling through the bones of an old house and settling in a man's chest where it burns like coal. Elias Cooper had learned to live with it the way a man learns to live with a limp. You drag yourself forward, step after step, because stopping is worse. His ranch stretched wide beneath a low-hanging sky, fences leaning like tired old men, the well nearly dry, and dust curling over every patch of ground as though the land itself was sighing. Work never ended, but neither did loneliness. The only light in his world was Mary. 6 years old, bright-eyed, her hair tangled with dust and sun. She followed him across the pastures as though she were his shadow. Sometimes she'd ask questions he could not answer, about her mother's voice, her laugh, her scent. Elias would fall silent, then, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the horizon. He told himself he was protecting her from the weight of his sorrow, but truth was simpler. He didn't know how to speak of love without choking on loss. That evening, as the sky burned orange and the cattle pressed restless against the fence, Elias sensed a shift in the air. The clouds had a swollen look, the kind that meant a storm would break fast and without mercy. He brought Mary inside, bolted the door, and stoked the fire high. The house creaked with each gust. Rain began to lash the windows like thrown gravel, and lightning cracked, bleaching the room white before plunging it back into shadow. A knock came, hard, hurried, desperate. Elias's hand went to the rifle before the sound had even died. No one came out this way, not without reason, and reasons on the frontier were often edged with steel. He pushed Mary behind him, lifted the latch, and yanked the door open just as another flash of lightning split the sky. She stood there barefoot, hair plastered to her face, a tattered shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. Water streamed off her, like she'd been born of the storm itself. Her eyes, wide, hunted, searched his face as though begging for mercy. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "They'll find me if I stay out here." Elias kept the rifle steady. "Who's after you?" She shook her head, coughing against the rain. "I've come too far to turn back. I just need a place to rest. One night, I'll be gone at dawn." Mary peered around her father's side, her small fingers clutching his coat. Elias meant to tell her to get back, but she was staring at the stranger with a kind of wonder. Then she whispered, soft but certain, "She smells like Mama." The words hit Elias harder than any bullet could. His hand tightened on the rifle, then loosened. His chest burned as though the storm had surged into his ribs. The woman shivered on the threshold, waiting for judgment. For the first time in years, Elias hesitated. He stepped aside without a word. She entered, dripping water across the floorboards. Her shoulders bent beneath a weight he could not see, but felt all the same. Elias barred the door and set the rifle against the wall. Mary slipped free of his coat and edged close to the woman, her eyes fixed, searching. Elias wanted to drag her back, to sever whatever connection her child's heart thought it had found, but his own strength failed him in that moment. The woman knelt, brushing damp hair from her face. She offered Mary a trembling smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Thank you for letting me in," she said, her voice raw, every syllable heavy with exhaustion. Elias studied her by firelight. She bore bruises along her jaw, the kind that spoke of fists and cruelty. Her hands were cut, dirt ground into the skin as though she'd been clawing her way across the land. She could be trouble in human shape, but Mary leaned against her without fear, breathing deep as though she found something she'd lost. The storm raged on, the walls groaning beneath its weight. Elias dragged a chair near the fire, his eyes never leaving the stranger. He wanted answers, who she was, what she ran from, but for now silence ruled. Questions could come later. The prairie had taught him patience, though it had taught him suspicion too. Lightning flared again, and through the window Elias caught sight of movement along the ridge. Dark figures, mounted, holding steady against the wind. They didn't ride closer, not yet, but their presence was as certain as a storm. Elias's grip found the rifle once more, though he did not lift it. He kept his gaze steady, breathing slow, a hunter waiting for the sign that told him whether he faced prey or predators. The woman did not see them. She curled near the fire with Mary at her side, whispering words Elias couldn't catch, her tone soothing as a lullaby. His daughter's eyelids fluttered, heavy with sleep, her head resting against a woman's arm. It looked too natural, too dangerous, like fate reaching a hand across the years. Elias sat in the shadows, the storm's fury roaring around the house, and kept his silence. He didn't know her name, didn't know her sins, but he knew the ridge was no place for friendly riders. Tomorrow would bring questions and maybe blood. Tonight he watched the firelight play across her bruised face and wondered if the prairie was giving him a gift or luring him into a trap. The storm would pass, as all storms did. But Elias felt certain his life had already shifted, the ground beneath him tilting towards something he could neither stop nor escape. And outside, the riders waited. Morning came clear, the storm spent and the prairie washed raw by rain. The light was sharp, the kind that carved shadows deep, and Elias found himself studying the woman by the fire as though daylight might strip away whatever lies she carried. She had not spoken her name. She had not spoken much at all. Mary, however, clung to her as if she had always belonged, trailing her from hearth to table with an ease that unsettled Elias more than it comforted him. When he asked again who she was, the woman only said, "Clara." No surname, no history, just a name dropped like a stone into water, sinking fast. Elias pressed no further for the moment. Men who pushed too hard often got nothing but silence, and he was no stranger to silence. Still, suspicion nagged him like a thorn under the skin. The day demanded work. Fences stretched in need of mending, cattle scattered from a night's fright, and the ranch itself stood on the edge of collapse. Elias expected Clara to remain inside, perhaps to rest or vanish without word. Yet she followed him into the yard with Mary tagging behind. Without asking, she gathered fallen branches, set to stacking them. Her movements quick though her hands bore cuts that reopened with the effort. Elias told her she needn't, but she only said, "Idle hands draw memories." The word struck him harder than he let show. At supper, Clara hummed while stirring beans over the fire. The sound froze Elias, though Mary beamed at it. It was a tune Elias had not heard since his wife, Annie, had sung it softly in evenings long gone, rocking Mary to sleep. He nearly spoke, nearly demanded where Clara had learned it, but the question died bitter on his tongue. Coincidence, he told himself, though the prairie had little use for coincidences. The town lay a few miles off, and Elias made the trip the following day, wary of the figures he had seen on the ridge. He left Mary with Clara, though distrust gnawed at him for it. In town, whispers carried. A band of outlaws had been spotted near the river crossing, mean men with eyes like wolves. The sheriff leaned on the rail outside his office, his jaw grim. "They're asking about a woman," he said. "A runaway, young, dark-haired. Some say she stole from them. Some say worse." Elias felt the weight of the words press cold against his ribs. He remembered the bruises on Clara's jaw, the way she had flinched at shadows. He remembered Mary's whisper, "She smells like Mama." A man like him could not afford to trust easily, but neither could he ignore the dangers circling his land. He thanked the sheriff, bought nails and salt, and rode home with a storm in his chest that no clear sky could ease. That night he confronted her, rifle across his knees, voice low but steady. He asked if she was a woman the outlaws hunted. Clara's hand shook, though she lifted her chin. "I was married," she said, "to a man who thought me his property. He and his gang bled towns dry, left graves where laughter once stood. When he struck me one time too many, I ran. I've been running ever since." Her eyes shimmered but did not break. "If they find me, they won't just take me back. They'll burn everything I've touched." Elias weighed her words in the silence that followed. Lies or truth, the risk was the same. Riders circling like buzzards, eyes fixed on his ranch. He thought of sending her away, but Mary's laughter floated from the loft, bright and fragile, and the decision hollowed him out. A man alone could guard his land. A father could not gamble his child against wolves. Clara took to working beside him as days stretched thin. She mended torn shirts with stitches rough but serviceable, cooked meals Elias had long since forgotten the taste of, and tended Mary with a gentleness that drew the girl's trust like a magnet. Elias kept his distance, though he watched. He noticed the way Clara's gaze darted toward every distant sound, the way her hands tensed whenever hooves echoed across the plain. He saw, too, her quiet strength, the way she braced her shoulders beneath fear, yet did not crumble. The outlaws did not stay distant. One evening Elias found the fence wire slashed clean, the herd scattered wild. He tracked the hoof prints in the dirt, sharp and deliberate, leading toward the northern ridge where the storm riders had lingered. They had not taken cattle for gain. They had spooked them as a warning, a sign written in dust and hoofbeats. Asterisk, we are here. We are coming. Asterisk. When Elias returned, Clara stood on the porch with Mary at her side, eyes fixed on the horizon. He did not speak of the prince, but Clara seemed to know. Her voice was barely more than breath when she said, "They won't stop, not until they've dragged me back." Elias felt something old stir inside him then, something buried beneath grief and dust. Rage, perhaps, or resolve. He tightened his grip on the rifle and looked toward the fading sun, where long shadows reached across the land like fingers. He had lost one woman to fate, and that wound had near destroyed him. He would not let wolves take another, nor let them near his child. The prairie had grown quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to wait. Elias knew the stillness was only a mask before the storm. He glanced once at Clara, once at Mary, and understood the path ahead would not be walked in peace. Somewhere beyond the ridge, men sharpened their blades and made ready. The ground beneath him had begun to shift, and there was no turning back. The air thickened in the days that followed, heavy with the kind of silence that precedes thunder. Elias sharpened blades, checked ammunition, and moved Mary's bed to the cellar, where stone walls and earth could shield her if gunfire came. Each sound outside, the snap of a twig, the cry of a hawk, twisted his gut into knots. Clara sensed it too. She moved through the house with a wary grace, always glancing toward windows, her hands trembling only when she thought no one watched. On the third evening, as the sun burned low, Elias saddled his horse and rode the fence line. He did not make it halfway before shadows erupted from the scrub. 5 riders surged forward, rifles lifted, their horses foaming at the bit. Dust rose like smoke around them. Elias spurred hard, firing 2 quick shots, short, sharp cracks that echoed across the plains. One rider dropped, his horse bolting. Another swerved wide, but bullets whined close to Elias's head. He ducked low, teeth gritted, urging his horse toward the cover of rocks. The fight was brief but brutal. A bullet tore across his shoulder, hot pain spreading fast. He managed to down a second outlaw before the rest wheeled back, laughing as they vanished into the ridge. Their message was clear. They could have killed him but chose not to. They were hunting, savoring the chase. Bleeding, Elias forced himself home. Clara met him at the gate, her hands flying to his wound, eyes wide with fear. He tried to brush her off, but she would not be moved. In the kitchen, she tore strips from her skirt, binding his shoulder with a steadiness that belied the trembling in her jaw. At last, she spoke the truth without flinching. "My husband," she said, voice low but steady, "was Cole Danner. He led those men. I thought him dead when a marshal's bullet struck him down last winter, but the gang never broke. They call themselves the Black Vultures, and they've been circling me ever since. If he's alive, he'll drag me back. If not, they'll take me as his claim." She lifted her chin, though her eyes shone. "And they'll take whatever else they please, including your daughter." Elias listened in silence, jaw set like iron. He had known Cole Danner once. Years past, a man with a grin sharp as a knife in cruelty to match. It made sense now, too much sense. He could send Clara away, let the storm pass beyond his fences, but the thought of Mary in their hands hollowed him. He had buried one family. He would not bury another. The night deepened. Elias sat by the fire, loading weapons with mechanical precision, while Clara tucked Mary into the cellar. The girl clung to her, whispering prayers she barely remembered. Upstairs, the floorboards groaned beneath Elias's boots. He felt the house itself tense, bracing for what was to come. They arrived just after midnight. Hooves thundered across the yard, lanterns swaying like restless stars. Voices hooped and jeered, then shattered windows with stones. Elias raised his rifle and fired through the doorway, the blast shaking the walls. Shouts rang back, curses sharp as spurs. The siege had begun. Bullets tore into the siding, splinters flying. Clara, defying Elias's order to stay hidden, seized a shotgun from the rack and took her place beside him. Her first shot boomed through the smoke, dropping a rider who had dared too close. She reloaded with frantic hands, muttering through clenched teeth. Elias cast her a sharp glance, but said nothing. In that moment, she was no longer a stranger. She was survival itself. The fight raged hot and fast. Horses screamed, men shouted. Flames licked at the porch as lantern oil spilled. Elias moved like a man possessed, every shot clean, every breath measured. He took a bullet grazing his leg, but kept standing, kept firing. Clara fought with fierce determination, her shawl slipping, her hair loose and wild, eyes blazing like a cornered wolf. Then the front door buckled. A massive shape crashed through. Cole Danner himself, scarred but very much alive. His grin was jagged, his eyes burning with cruel delight. "You thought you could run, Clara," he spat, voice like gravel. "You thought you could hide behind this broken man?" Elias lifted his rifle, but Danner lunged, knocking it aside. They collided, fists striking bone, bodies slamming against the table until it shattered. Pain ripped through Elias's wounded shoulder, but he did not yield. He fought with everything grief had left him, with the memory of Annie and the sight of Mary's small hands pressed together in prayer below their feet. The room blurred with heat and smoke. Clara screamed, firing the shotgun point blank into one of Danner's men as he stormed inside. Blood spattered across the wall. Danner laughed even as Elias's fist broke his lip, the sound a sick echo of triumph. "You're already a ghost, Cooper," Danner snarled. "You just don't know it yet." Elias drove his head forward, cracking bone against bone, forcing Danner back. Breathless, he grabbed a broken chair leg and swung hard, knocking the outlaw to the floor. For a heartbeat, silence stretched thin, broken only by the crackle of fire. But outside, more boots pounded across the dirt. The vultures were not finished. Clara stood beside him, panting, eyes wide but unbroken. Smoke curled up the walls, the heat pressing close. Elias's chest heaved, blood dripping from his shoulder and leg. Danner was down but not dead, the gang still at their heels, the ranch itself threatening to burn around them. Elias met Clara's gaze across the chaos. He saw not just fear but something harder, resolve, fierce as steel. They had no choice but to finish what had begun. The storm had come to their door, and there would be no peace until the last shot was fired. Smoke thickened, choking the air, curling along the beams until rafters glowed orange with heat. Elias dragged Clara toward the cellar hatch where Mary waited, but Cole Danner's laughter cut through the roar of flames. The outlaw pushed himself upright, blood on his teeth, eyes bright with fury. He raised his pistol, the barrel glinting in firelight. Elias had no rifle, only the broken chair leg still clutched in his hand. He braced himself, every muscle tight, certain this would be the last moment of his life. Then Clara stepped forward, steadying the shotgun against her bruised shoulder. Her voice shook, but her aim did not. "Not again," she whispered, and pulled the trigger. The blast echoed like thunder. Danner crumpled, his pistol clattering across the floor. For a moment, nothing moved but the fire. Clara's hands dropped, the shotgun slipping from her grasp. She stood rigid, staring at the man who had haunted every mile of her flight, and Elias saw her shoulders sag as if a mountain had lifted at last. But outside, the vultures screamed for blood. Their boots struck hard, their rifles cracking. Elias pulled Clara toward the hatch. They joined Mary in the cellar, pressing close in the dark as bullets tore into the house above. Mary's small hands trembled against Clara's, yet her eyes shone with fierce belief. "Papa will stop them," she said. The words, simple and certain, lit something inside Elias he thought had died with Annie. They could not wait forever. Smoke seeped through the cracks, hot and suffocating. Elias forced the hatch open, slipping into the night with Clara and Mary close behind. The ranch burned behind them, a beacon against the prairie's darkness, drawing the vultures like moths. Elias set Mary down behind a water trough, handed Clara his pistol, and raised his rifle once more. The fight spilled into the yard. Quick, brutal, merciless. Outlaws charged, Horses screaming, muzzle flashes tearing through the dark. Elias moved with deadly focus, every shot purposeful, each step calculated. Clara fought too, her hands steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. Beside the trough, Mary prayed in whispers, clutching her locket as though it might anchor the world. One by one the vultures fell, their cries swallowed by gunfire. But Elias faltered, his leg giving out as blood soaked his trousers. Clara pulled him behind cover, her own breath ragged. "You can't fall now," she hissed, pressing her hand against his wound. Her eyes met his, fierce and unyielding. "Not when she still needs you." Something in him answered. A part of himself, he thought, buried rose, raw and relentless. He shoved back to his feet, firing until the last outlaw broke, fleeing into the dark with fear in his eyes. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the crackle of the burning house. The black vultures were broken, their leader dead. The ranch, though scarred, still stood. Dawn crept over the horizon, cool light spilling across the blood-soaked yard. Elias lowered himself onto porch steps, exhausted, his wounds throbbing with each heartbeat. Clara sat beside him, her face streaked with soot, her eyes hollow but alive. Mary curled between them, resting her head on Clara's lap, as though she had always belonged there. The girl's voice was faint but clear. "She smells like Mama." Elias closed his eyes. For years he had carried grief like a stone, believing it would crush him before it ever let him go. Yet now, in the quiet after battle, he felt something loosen, not the forgetting of loss, but the opening of a space where hope could breathe. Clara was no ghost of Annie, no replacement for what had been. She was her own storm, scarred, resilient, unwilling to bow. And perhaps that was what the prairie had given him. Not what he had lost, but what he still needed to carry on. They buried the dead at the edge of the field, marked only by stones. Elias worked slow, his body aching, Clara at his side, Mary placing wildflowers on a mound with solemn care. The prairie wind whistled through the grass, a low, steady hymn. Life would go on, stubborn as weeds pushing through dry earth. In the days that followed, they rebuilt. The barn was patched, new wires strung across the pasture. Smoke stains marked the house, but laughter returned to its walls. Mary ran across the yard, Clara calling after her with a voice that warmed even Elias's weathered heart. He found himself smiling more, not often, but enough for Mary to notice. At night, when the stars spilled wide across the sky, he sat on the porch with Clara beside him. Silence no longer sharp but shared, a language all its own. Elias knew the prairie would never promise peace. Wolves would always circle. Storms would always come. But he had faced the darkness and found he was not as alone as he believed. He had Mary's laughter, Clara's quiet strength, and a future that felt, for the first time in years, possible. The narrator's voice, low and steady, turned outward, carried by the wind. In the end, the land doesn't just take, it gives. Sometimes it gives back what you lost, shaped different, scarred and stronger, but enough to steady your hand when the night grows long. A man can't choose the storms that break him, but he can choose what rises in their wake. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.